All right, welcome again. We're going to see the first part of the endocrine disorders. This is a split in 3 videos, and this is the first one. As usual, here you have the objectives of the lecture. All right, this map showing the organization of the endocrine system. We'll see this map along the following lectures so you can know where we are at the explanations. You can distinguish different levels in a kind of pyramid. On top we have the central nervous system with the hypothalamus that connects with the pituitary gland in what is known as the hypothalamus-pituitary axis. The pituitary is the first target of the hypothalamic hormones. This gland is made of an anterior part called adenohypophysis and a posterior part called neurohypophysis. They produce several hormones that usually target other endocrine glands in the body, and the hormones these final glands release finally target different body tissues where they produce an effect. This image shows the anatomical structure and the relationship between the hypothalamus and the anterior and posterior pituitary. Also, the hormones that they produce are shown. Being here in this image, being the right side, the anterior pituitary, okay, because classically they draw the other way, so you don't get confused. So at the top we have the hypothalamus, which is part of the central nervous system, where emotion, pain, body temperature and many other inputs are communicated, and which controls the release of the pituitary hormones. The hypothalamus produces corticotropin releasing hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, and gonadotropin releasing hormone, as you see in this square. The hormone releasing actions of the hypothalamus need to be controlled, and this is done by negative feedback from the hormones and a variety of other neural inputs. These neural inputs are produced through neurotransmitters like you know them from neurology: acetylcholine, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, gamma-aminobutyric acid, and opioids. Also, interleukins modulate the hypothalamus. You know, those are chemicals released in inflammation. So the hypothalamus is basically a bridge that canalizes multiple signals to the endocrine system. One step down we have the pituitary gland. Here you have a list of the hormones produced by the anterior pituitary. We will rapidly review their actions in a minute, and at the beginning of the hyperaldosteronism presentation that will come after this one. As you see in this map, the hormones produced by the final endocrine glands usually have a negative feedback on the hypothalamus-pituitary axis that stops the secretion of the initial hormone that controls the cascade. In other cases, like with insulin, this is a part of the endocrine system that we review with diabetes mellitus. Like insulin, the control is in the hands of a non-hormonal substance like glucose, the blood levels of glucose. So this fine control maintains the body in homeostatic balance. Given the connection of the endocrine system with the central nervous system, many other factors influence the release of hormones, like, for instance, stress, external temperature, or nutritional state. As usual, we will review the most common conditions in relation with the endocrine system, and we will start with hypopituitarism and then the most common disorders of the adrenal cortical function in the two following presentations. Hypopituitarism is the underproduction of hormones released by the pituitary gland, and the symptoms depend on which hormones are actually undersecreted. If all the pituitary hormones are affected, let's say the pituitary is destroyed, it is called hypopituitarism. Okay, you know the pituitary is a pea-sized gland hanging by a stalk from the base of the brain. It sits just behind the eyes near the optic chiasm, and the gland rests in a very small bony depression of the skull known as the sella turcica. The pituitary gland produces unsecreted hormones when it receives signals from the hypothalamus. Together they form the before named hypothalamic pituitary axis, which regulates the release of all the major endocrine hormones. As you know, the pituitary itself has two distinct parts, anterior and posterior. The anterior pituitary contains a few different types of cells, each of which secretes a different hormone. The largest group of cells are the somatotropes, which secrete growth hormone, which goes on to promote tissue and organ growth. The second largest group are the corticotrophs, which secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone or ACTH, which stimulates the adrenal glands to secrete cortisol, a very important hormone that controls the stress response, blood pressure, metabolic regulation, and other functions. A smaller group are the lactotrophs, which secrete prolactin. All right, prolactin stimulates breast milk production and also inhibits ovulation, which is when an egg cell is released from the ovary, and also inhibits spermatogenesis. There are also thyrotrophs, which are cells that secrete thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH that stimulates the thyroid gland to secrete T3 and T4. And finally, there are gonadotrophs, which secrete two gonadotropic hormones, which are luteinizing hormone or LH and follicle stimulating hormone FSH, both of which go on to stimulate the ovaries and the testes. You have them there. And the posterior pituitary, which is the back of the pituitary, releases the antidiuretic hormone or ADH, which is made by the hypothalamus directly. ADH acts on the kidneys to decrease the amount of water lost in urine. This part of the pituitary also produces oxytocin, which is responsible for uterine contractions during labor and milk letdown during breastfeeding. There you have it. Alright, so hypopituitarism can be the result of compression, tissue ischemia or infarction, and also iatrogenic or medically induced injuries. So let's start with compression. Because the pituitary exists within the very confined space of the sella turcica, it's very sensitive to changes in that space. Even the slightest bit of compression can interfere with the pituitary hormones production. In adults, the most common cause of compression is a pituitary tumor or adenoma, and in children, the tumor is usually a craniopharyngioma. This one is malignant. These craniopharyngiomas are pituitary tumors that develop from the cell's Rathke's pouch, which is a structure that normally develops into the anterior pituitary gland during fetal development. Alright, so in addition to solid tissue compressing the pituitary gland, liquid, like the cerebrospinal liquid, can also have the same effect. In empty cellar, this is called empty cellar syndrome, for example, the cellar becomes filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and it can make the pituitary shrink or flatten and ultimately become non-functional. Hypopituitarism can also be due to pituitary apoplexy, which is a disorder where there is either severe bleeding, such as an hemorrhage, or a loss of blood flow to the pituitary gland due to infarction. And of these two, more common is hemorrhage. The hemorrhage is usually caused by the pituitary adenoma that we saw in adults, which is a benign tumor of this anterior pituitary gland. But you know that large tumors demand more blood, and increased blood flow means increased pressure into the vessels, eventually causing them to rupture and bleed. The second and less common way of hypopituitarism caused by pituitary apoplexy can develop when there's infarction of that gland. And an example would be Sheehan's syndrome, which is commonly associated with pregnant women. During pregnancy, there's an increased demand for blood by the pituitary cells, and this is coupled with excessive blood loss during childbirth and leaves the pituitary cells without adequate blood flow, and they start to die. If that blood flow is not restored immediately, more and more tissue dies, and over time the pituitary gland shrinks, become scared, and it can no longer effectively secrete hormones. And finally, there's a iatrogenic cause of hypopituitarism, like when there's unintentional damage to the gland during radiation therapy or neurosurgery. All right, so the symptoms that can develop with hypopituitarism can they can vary greatly depending on which hormone is depleted. In general, LH and FSH and GH are lost before TSH or ACTH. So, in fact, ACTH is the last one to get lost. So one main product or final product of this hormone is cortisol. All right, so you won't see the manifestations of losing cortisol until quite late. So let's go through these in order. First, we have hyposecretion of follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone, together known as gonadotrophins. They can cause problems in men and women. Women may experience oligomenorrhea, which is a decrease in their menstrual bleeding, or amenorrhea, which is a complete absence of menstrual bleeding and possibly infertility. Men may experience loss of pubic hair and a reduction in muscle mass. and both men and women commonly complain of diminished libido. The loss of gonadotropins is also seen in Sheehan syndrome, resulting in similar symptoms like absence of menstruation, but the loss of prolactin also causes problems with postpartum lactation. Moving on, a lack of adrenocorticotropic hormones cause adrenal insufficiency or lack of cortisol production by the adrenal glands, and that leads to weight loss, delayed puberty, and low blood sugar and sodium levels. Growth hormone deficiency results in failure to grow in children, delayed puberty in adolescents, and lean body mass and low bone density in adults. Hypopituitarism can also cause hypothyroidism due to the diminished production of thyroid stimulating hormone, with classic symptoms such as weight gain in this case, constipation, hair loss, and low blood pressure. And finally, in addition to all the endocrine abnormalities, if there's a tumor or fluid built up, it can cause local symptoms like increased intracranial pressure and headaches. The pituitary gland is also close to the optic chiasm, as you know, which is where the optic nerves cross. So extra pressure in this area will compress these nerves and lead to visual field defects like bitemporal hemianopsia, where the person suffers partial blindness in the lateral fields of both eyes. So the diagnosis of hypopituitarism is usually done by first assessing baseline levels of the hormones in the morning, which accurately measure all the pituitary hormones except for the growth hormone and adrenocorticotropic hormone, because those hormones levels are more variable throughout the day. Next, it's helpful to see how hormone levels change in response to a substance that should stimulate hormone release. For example, administering insulin should cause a drop in blood sugar, which in turn stimulates the release of growth hormone and adrenocorticotropic hormone from the anterior pituitary. If these hormone levels remain low, despite stimulatory effects of insulin, it may indicate hypopituitarism. Finally, MRI scans can help to look for possible causes of hypopituitarism like tumors or hemorrhage. The treatment is based on correcting the underlying cause. In case of an adenoma, surgery can be performed to remove the tumor, or hormone replacement therapy might be needed if the pituitary damage is severe. Okay, so thank you for listening. This is all by now.